move to the term is the articulation of the concept. But the term is in public domain. Concept is a subjective experience. Right? And that's why we can have different concepts. We can conceptualize things differently. But the term is in public domain. The term differs from the word in that the term is not conventional. The language that it's expressed in is conventional. So if I use, for instance, if I say mahabba in Arabic, that's a word. The term is the ma'na of mahabba, which causes the tasawwur. All right? So it's a chain reaction. You say the word, the term is understood, the tasawwur happens. This is what's happening in your mind. And that's why we can use, if we speak different languages, we can use the same words, different words for the same term. So we can say amor, or we can say hub, or we can say caritas in Latin, or we can say agape in Greek. These are all different words for the same term. And the term is the ma'na that the tasawwur grasps. So what he's saying is that the term اللفظ الدال بالوضعي يدل على تمام ما وضع له بالمطابقة. So the term بالوضعي, whatever the conventional usage of it is what indicates the meaning. Either by correspondence, mutabaqa is that it actually corresponds completely with the thing. So if you understand the term insan, a correspondence of that would be your understanding rational animal. According to that definition, some people are going to reject these definitions. So you have to understand these are definitions that rational people have agreed on. Right? But not everybody. You have to understand, you're going to be confronted with people that don't accept it. I don't think humans are rational animals. I think they're totally irrational. And there's going to be people like that. But this is what our ulama said is, once you understand how you define, and we'll get to that when we get to the definitions. وَعَلَى جُزِهِ بِالتَّضَمُّنِ. All right, so also if it has a part, because some things don't have parts, but if it has a part by partial accord, and that which is inextricably bound to it in the mind by concomitance, iltizam. So he's going to give examples. For example, the term human indicates, or insan, indicates its entire meaning of a rational animal. That should be animal. Haywan natiq. By complete accord, so that's been mutabaqa, by correspondence. That's what corresponds. And one of them, either rational or creature, by tadammun. So you can have a partial, right? That's tadammun. So if I say animal, that includes humans, horses, donkeys, all those. Those are all included by tadammun. You see, when I say animal, I can see the particulars of that. You got it? Yeah. And then also the meaning receptive to knowledge and the skill of writing by iltizam. So humans, if I say man, by iltizam, in other words, by concomitance, it means somebody who's capable of writing, of learning to write, or learning to speak, or learn, right? And this is important because this is used a lot in language. When people speak, often they speak by iltizam. They might not express fully what they're saying, but you understand. It's implied in the words, right? That all people love truth. By iltizam, all rational people love truth, right? All good people love truth. Because there's people that hate the truth, right? There's people that love falsehood. There's people that use falsehood. Now, we get into the 5 universals. I'm not going to do definitions yet because we're going to do those. But he doesn't cover, we're going to quickly go through this, hopefully this class will inspire you to study deeper, especially for the students of knowledge. I mean, you're all students of knowledge, but those who are going to go on and study Islamic studies at a deeper level, you have to get a good grasp of this science to understand our classical tradition. These are called the maqulat al-ashar. These are the 10 categories. And by categories, I mean the Arabs call them maqulat. The categories, according to Aristotle, they're the genera. They're the highest. They're basically, they would be called postulates in geometry. They're the highest things that when we predicate, when we speak about things, ultimately it's these 10 categories are how we speak about things and how we talk about things. So the first one is the Jauhar. The Jauhar is substance, but when he's using this, what he means is the thing itself. So the human being, each one of us has a substance. We take up space. We have quantity and quality, and that substance, we have an idea in our tradition, which is that the Muslims have an atomic theory, which is unique to Islam. There were pre-Islamic atomic theories, Democritus and others. But the Muslims developed a very unique atomic theory because they believed that what they call the Jauhar al-Fard, these monads, which are not atoms in the modern sense, because atoms are divisible, but the monad is indivisible. وَالْعَالِمُ إِسْمُ مَا سِوَى دَيَّانِ مِنْ نُوعِي الْأَعْرَاضِ وَالْأَعْيَانِ. The world, this is Imam al-Maqari says, the world is a name, al-alam is a name for everything other than Allah. So when we say al-alam, it's what's other than Allah. He's Rabbul Alameen. From the two types, al-arad wal-a'yan. The arad is the accident. Ma yaqumu bi ghayrihi. It's what needs something else to exist. The Jauhar is yaqumu bi nafsihi. Right? In reality, it's Allah, al-Hayyul Qayyum. Allah is enabling everything. But this is the breakdown. So the Jauhar is what the accidents exist in. They can't exist without an essence. They have to have an essence. So that's the Jauhar. Al-Jauhar al-Fard. وَلَمْ يُحَقِّقْ غَيْرَ دَيْنِ قِسْمُ وَكُلُّ مَا أُلِّفَ فَهُوَ الْجِسْمُ. And the ulama have not seen anything other than these two things in existence. The a'yan, the essences, and the a'rad. These are two things that exist. وَكُلُّ مَا أُلِّفَ فَهُوَ الْجِسْمُ. And everything that is composite is a body. So the body is made of substance. And that substance are these jawahir, which are on an on-off cycle. So they're being created and destroyed in every instant. And so that's the first category, the Jauhar, what you're made up of, your substance. The second category is Qam. This is the quantitative. So you have Qam, and then you have Kayf. So you have the quantitative and the qualitative. The quantitative is how much is there. So when you talk about something, you say there's two of them. So that's the quantity. There are 2 eggs. I bought 2 eggs. You could say they were white eggs. Now I'm talking about the quality. Color is a quality. Or you could say they were well-cooked eggs. Right? So that's quality. And then you have the Aina. I bought the eggs at that store next to the masjid. There's the place. I bought them yesterday at 4 o'clock. There's the time. So you have the place and the time. And then you have the Idafa, the relationship. So you say, for instance, so-and-so is the son of so-and-so. That's the relationship. Or the wall is 30 feet away from me. So that's a relationship. And I'm also, because it goes both ways, I'm 30 feet away from the wall. So it's relative. So relationship is relative. And then you have the wada, which is how you're placed. So it's your position. And then you have the milk, which is your property. So they also call it the lahu, what you have. So like he says, kathawban, ihaban intaqal, like a gown, what you're wearing. So yalbisu thawban, he's wearing a thawb. So that's his milk. And then you have the fi'al and the infial, the action and then the passion, what's being done to you. So what you're doing and what's being done to you. And though, if you think about it, you're going to be hard-pressed to find any other type of expression. And this is pretty exhaustive. So these are the 10. If you want them in Arabic, for those who want them in Arabic, this is like a mnemonic for memorizing them. And then he says, ثم اللفظ إما مفرد وهو الذي لا يراد بالجزء منه. So then a vocable that signifies meaning is either singular, mufrad, namely that which a part of it does not designate a part of its meaning, like human, or it is composite, mu'allaf, namely the opposite, such as one who casts stones. So you have he says singular, it's actually, you have incomplex or complex. That's the English technical vocabulary in logic. So one term is incomplex and the other is complex. So, because singular actually means something else in logic. This is a good translation, but there's a few just tweaks that I would do to it, and that's one of them. So there he's talking about you have a complex and an incomplex. So an incomplex is just simply a statement like Zayd, right? Zayd. And then you have like Rami al-Hijara. That's complex, one who casts stones, because you have the Rami and the Hijara. And then he's Rami al-Hijara. So it's not simple, it's compounded. والمفرد إما كلي وهو الذي لا يمنع نفس تصور مفهومه عن وقوع الشركة كالإنسان وإما جزئي وهو الذي يمنع نفس تصور مفهومه من ذلك كزيد. So this incomplex is either a universal, namely that which the very comprehension of the designated meaning does not prevent the occurrence of commonality. So, in other words, it can mean you're talking about all of these different things that share the same things. There's a universal aspect to it. But it's a simple understanding, like human. And then you have, so therein, by instantiation, like human, or a particular, namely that which the very comprehension of its designated meaning does not prevent that, like the proper name Zayd. So there is the Juz'i. So you have the Kulli and the Juz'i. You have the universal, and then you have the particular, which is something like Zayd. So that's a particular example of the universal. And they can both be incomplex. والكلي إما ذاتي وهو الذي يدخل في حقيقة جزئياته كالحيوان بنسبة إلى الإنسان والفرس وإما عرضي وهو الذي يخالفه كالضاحك بنسبة إلى الإنسان. The universal is either essential, it's dhati, namely that which applies to the essence of its members, such as animal is hayawan, so it should be, yeah, hayawan is animal. Creature is makhluk. And animal is what they use in Western logic for that. In relation to human or horse. So when we say animal, we can mean by it a human or a horse. They're different things, but they share animality. All right, so that's a universal that has, you're talking about the essential nature of something. Or it could be accidental, which is aradi. Namely, its contrast, such as the one that laughs in relation to human. So when you talk about a human being, one of his descriptions is that he's risible. That's the term that they'll usually use in English books on logic. Risible. In other words, they have the ability to laugh. And so that's aradi. It's actually a khasa. It's a type of arad lazim. It's a accident, inseparable accident to the human. By quwwa, by potential, not by fi'l. Because in fi'l, it comes and goes. But as a potential, humans can laugh. Like if I told you a joke, let me think of a good joke. See, you all just laughed. I didn't have to tell a joke. Now, not everybody laughed. But the point is, you all had the potential to laugh. So that was bil quwwa. That's a arad lazim. It's a property of human beings. By comprehension, right? Not necessarily by extension. And this is an important distinction. The comprehension is the mafhum. So when we speak about humans, we comprehend humans. That's the mafhum. But the extension is what that mafhum applies to. So the mafhum are all of those things that are comprehended by human. And this is where we get into what's called the tree of porphyry. So when we talk about human, the human being has what's called 5 notes. Because when we say human, we're talking about the first in the tree. Sometimes they put this the other way around, which makes more sense in terms of a tree. But in the first one, it has being, right? Being. That's the essential characteristic of all things. And there's 2 types of beings. What are they? No. Higher level. Okay, good. Yeah. Possible and necessary. Right? So you have being that is wajib al-wujud and being that is mumkin al-wujud. The ulama basically say that mustahil doesn't have being. There's a khilaf about that in Muslim metaphysics. Is Adam a thing or not a thing? Is non-existence a thing or is it not a thing? And this again gets to what we call meaning and reference. So you have meaning, it has a meaning, but it doesn't refer to anything. But it has a meaning. So you can conceptualize nothing, but you can't refer to anything that's nothing. So the next level, once being, now remember, God is not in the 10 categories. So just nix that from your mind. When we're talking about the 10 categories, we're talking about created things. So God, we don't talk about God as being a physical being. We don't believe that. In fact, Imam al-Bukhari has a chapter called The Permissibility of Saying Thing About God. Jawaz itlaq shay' ala Allah. The reason they permit it is because to say that God is la shay', nothing, is like kufr. But we know laysa kamithlihi shay'un. There is no thing like him. So nothing that you can point to is like Allah. So when we say that Allah is a thing, what we mean is He has wujud. But if you look at the etymological meaning of thing, sha'a yasha'u shay'an. The shay is what is willed into existence. Allah is the one willing things into existence. But He was not willed into existence by anything. So in that way, Allah is not the masdar of sha'a yasha'u shay'an. He's the fa'il of sha'a yasha'u. He's the one who wills things into existence. But we don't say He's nothing. That's what the mulhidun say. God is nothing. And they would say that it has a meaning, but it doesn't have a referent. It doesn't really refer to anything, you see. So when you look at the term has a comprehension and it has an extension. When you have a tasawwur, you understand something. One of the things that modern people do is, because of a type of political correctness, they remove comprehension. They include comprehension and extension. They conflate the two terms. So you can't make statements like men are more aggressive than women. But in terms of comprehension, that's a true statement. In terms of extension, it's not a true statement. Do you see the difference? In other words, extension, when I say men, meaning dhukur, male human beings, I'm talking about 3 billion men on the earth. When I say females, I'm talking about another 3 billion. When I say man, meaning both male and female, I'm talking about all 6 billion. So my comprehension of man includes male and female. And it extends to all 6 billion living human beings that are alive. I could also, if I want, extend it to all human beings that have ever existed, exist, and will exist. I can extend it in that way. That the purpose for man's existence is to know God. Now I'm referring man. That's the purpose of man as a creature. So, you have comprehension and extension. When I talk about comprehension, comprehension doesn't necessarily extend to all people. So for instance, Aristotle, at the opening of his book on metaphysics, he said, all men by their nature desire to know. He's talking about man's comprehension, not man's extension. Because some men apparently could care less about knowing. But he's saying it's human nature to desire that thing. And this is why little children are always asking, why? What? What is that? What is that? Why? What is that? Where did it come from? Because that's their nature, is to know. But that can be stamped out. They can lose that. But so by extension, that's not true. Some people lose that desire to know. But it is human nature to desire to know. It's human nature. So extension, when we say men are more aggressive than women, we're talking about the comprehension. Men have testosterone. Testosterone makes them aggressive. Women have oxytocin, that makes them more compassionate, less aggressive. I mean, a lot of the so-called glass ceiling, they're discovering in the West by their own social sciences that women just aren't as assertive by nature. Doesn't mean all women, but the comprehension of women is that they're not as assertive as men. And now people don't want to hear that today because they're trying to build societies on biological lies. This is all political correctness. And it's not a negative thing about women. They're trying to make women like men. When it's more more the other way around. That women are there to humanize men, to make them more like women, with compassion and mercy, and right? Because men become shayateen pretty easily. It's easier for a man to become a shaitan than a woman, just by pure biology. You give women testosterone shots and you look what happens. Seriously, plenty of studies about this. The aggressiveness, roid rage, steroids. You know, give them all these male steroids and they turn into monsters just like most men. You're a physician. Is that true? I'm appealing to authority now. It's a logical fallacy. Yeah. So does everybody have if you don't, let me know. Because don't feel dumb, or people that get things slower tend to have them more permanently. So it's not necessarily stupidity. It's just by the time you get it, you really have it. Whereas other people, they get it really quick and then it's gone as quick as they got it.
So would we be able to summarize by saying comprehension would be natural and extension is not natural? As in, comprehension comes to us naturally and extension is the example of political correctness.
No, all extension means is it's when you have a concept of something, if you comprehend it. All right, once you comprehend it, all the extension means is all of those things that comprehension refers to. It's all the individual things that go under that comprehension. So for instance, if I say horse, you comprehend by horse this four-legged creature. Now, that's a comprehension, not an extension, because there's three-legged horses. Do you see? So, but the comprehension of a horse is a four-legged creature. It has a mane. It has a tail, right? It has a certain height. If it doesn't, it's a pony. Do you see? That's the comprehension. And that's your tasawwur. You grasp the essence of a horse. So if you see a Clydesdale is very different from an Arabian, but it shares horseness. It has the essence of a horse. And that's why when you see a Clydesdale, you might say, God, that's the weirdest horse I've ever seen. But you understand that it's a horse. And the same is true for a camel. Like if you see a Bactrian camel, right, the comprehension of a camel does not include one or two humps. Those are accidents. They're khasa to that specific camel. But we know a Bactrian camel has all that hair, but it's still a camel. Even though it has two humps, it's a camel. But it's a different type of camel. The Arabian dromedary, what's called a dromedary, that's another type of camel. So when I talk about extension of camel, I'm talking about all those things that apply to that word, the comprehension of that word. All those things that exist. That's the extension. And that's why you can have a meaning, because you have extension, and it's also called intention with a S. I-N-T-E-N-S-I-O-N. So extension, intention. In the older books, when you get into medieval scholastic writing, that's the word that they use in Latin, I think. And so it's used in some of the logic books. They call it extension, intention. John Stuart Mill called it denotation and connotation. So the denotation would be the extension, and the connotation would be the comprehension. And then the other term which is important is the meaning and the reference. That's also another way of looking at it from a different perspective, because in that you can have something that has comprehension but it doesn't have extension, like a unicorn. A unicorn has comprehension, but it doesn't refer to anything real, so it doesn't have extension, unless you were saying literary unicorn, so there's a unicorn in this book, a unicorn in that book, in that way, but it doesn't have real extension. Uh-huh.
Is it only God that is outside the category? And how do we understand?
Yeah, God. We can't talk about God in terms of place, time, you know, and even in relation, it's not we can't talk about him in relation in any real sense of that word. Like he's the khaliq and we're the makhluq. And in that way there is a type of nisbah, right? But it's,
Yeah, but is there anything else which is outside the 10 category? And how do we understand the sentence, it's not because there is 10 cities, then there is no nomads?
okay, good point. Yeah, in terms of, when you look at the tree here of periphery, in terms of being, the first question is it material or is it immaterial? If it's material, it has madda. If it's immaterial, it's spiritual. It doesn't have madda. So, for instance, the angels are immaterial. They're immaterial. And their light is not like physical light. But we know that they can take form. So they can enter into a type of appearance. And we can see them. Like Jibreel alayhi salam appeared to the Sahaba. We know that. That's the first question. Is it material or is it immaterial? But that's still in the realm of being. So like the jinn, the spirit world, which is real. And they exist alongside of us. And each human being has a qareen. Right? So we know that the shayateen are there, they whisper, people empower them and disempower them based on their vigilance, their dhikr. I mean, people shouldn't get obsessed with them, but we know that the hadith of the two jinn that meet, the shayateen, one of them's skinny and tired, exhausted, and the other one's really fat and strong. And the fat one says, "What's wrong with you?" And the skinny one says, "I have a horrible assignment. When he eats, he remembers Allah, I don't get any food. When he goes to sleep, he remembers Allah, I don't get any sleep." So by being vigilant, you wear the qareen out. Right? And by being in ghafla, you empower the qareen. And the Prophet said that everyone has one. He said, "Illa an Allah a'anani ala qarini fa aslama." So he became Muslim. The Prophet's qareen. The next one is it organic or inorganic? In other words, is it living or is it inanimate or animate? So like a rock goes under that category. A rock has material being, but it's inorganic. Whereas an animal or a plant is organic, right? If you studied organic chemistry. So the next one is it sentient or is it non-sentient? Now, again, some of this stuff breaks down a little bit. There's arguments that plants have some type of sentience. And there's certainly hadiths that would indicate that also. But generally, harakan mutanatti'un. At a most basic level, we eat vegetables. You're not, please tomato, forgive me for cutting you. We don't have to do that, right? Because it's considered non-sentient. It's not feeling. But we know the Prophet, the palm tree, that's mutawatir hadith. The palm tree moaned and that was a palm tree that wasn't even, it had already been cut. And then you have non-rational, which are the brutes, right? And then you have rational. So these are the notes. Now, it's an inverse relationship. The greater the extension, the less the comprehension. The greater the comprehension, the less the extension. In other words, each time you add a note, it applies to less numbers. So if you look at that first one, being, that's pretty much everything that's in existence. So it has the greatest extension. You go to the next one, material, right? That has less extension than the one before it because it doesn't include immaterial beings, spiritual beings. And then you go to organic, inorganic again. And then you go to sentient, non-sentient. So as the comprehension increases, the extension decreases. By the time you get to men, I mean, when we talk about animals, you're talking about billions of creatures out there, insects and all these different creatures. By the time you get to human, you're only talking about 6 billion. So the greater the comprehension, the less the extension. The greater the extension, the less the comprehension. Unfortunately, this becomes important down the road as you get into logic, because there are fallacies that are based on not understanding this distinction. That's why it is important. And in a lot of debates, people don't realize that, you know, you can call them on that and say, look, you're not talking about what that term extends to. You're talking about what it means. I mean, that's why it's a useful piece of information to know. Now, when you get into terms also, are we almost? Okay. When we get into terms, what are the 3 acts of the mind? Understanding, judgment, and reasoning. What's the technical term for understanding? Concept, right? And then the articulated concept is a term. What's the technical term for judgment? Proposition. And then the technical term for reasoning is argument or syllogism. So these are the 3 acts of the mind. They answer 3 questions. What? Whether? And why? Those are 3 questions. 3 W's, like World Wide Web, www. What, whether, why? The first question, what is it? Understanding. I need to know what it is. That's the first question. What is it? So you say, I had this amazing fruit today. It's called kiwi. Because this Australian guy brought me the fruit. I'd never had one before. So you say, what is it? And then you try to describe, well, it's a fruit. There's the genus. But what's its khasa? What's its fasal? What's its accident? That's when we start describing it. We get into its definition. All right? So that's what the first question is. That's about what? Now, the first question does not have to do with true or false. Has nothing to do with true or false. It has to do with ambiguous or unambiguous. Clear or unclear. So when you use a term, it's either used ambiguously or unambiguously. If I say, for instance, he's a good Muslim riding a good horse on a good journey. I've used the word good 3 times. When I say he's a good Muslim, am I using that in the same way that I say he has a good horse? It can't be. And when I say he's on a good journey, I don't mean that in the same way that good. So that term, good, is a very ambiguous term. It can be used for a lot of different things. When I say he's a good Muslim, I probably mean he's pious and dutiful. He's salih, he's upright. When I say he has a good horse, it's well trained. It's fast, it's strong, it has endurance. And then he's on a good journey. He could be going to Hajj, so there's a good religious journey. He could be going to China to make money, so there's a halal livelihood journey. He could be going to visit his grandmother, so there's silat al-rahim. So when we speak, one of the major problems in speaking is ambiguity. And this is where most problems occur, right? I mean, there's other reasons, like the 2 monks. This is a true story. There's 2 monks, and they lived together 20 years. They never once had an argument. 20 years, never had an argument. So one of the monks said to the other one, they lived in the same cell. They were in a monastery in Sinai. One of the monks said to the other one, let's have an argument just one time. You know, just see what it's like. So the other one said, well, what should we argue about? He said, well, okay, let's see this brick. And he places a brick between the two of them. He said, I'm going to say the brick's mine. And then you say, no, it's mine. He said, okay. So he said, that brick's mine. And the other one said, no, it's not, it's mine. He said, no, it's mine. And the other one said, really? He said, yes. He said, then you can have it. End of the argument, right? So that's another reason for fighting, is over possession and property and what I think is mine and what you think is yours, right? But the brick was understood, the terms were understood, so there was a different reason. But many arguments are over ambiguity in terms, what you mean. Like right now, you see, for instance, in Egypt, they don't want to use the term coup, because that's a loaded term. Because, for instance, when you have a coup d'etat, the Western, they're supposed to condemn those, because you're overriding democratic process. And you're supposed to cut off relationships with them, right? Like they did with Mauritania when they had the coup in Mauritania, right? But Egypt, it's a little too important. It's not like Mauritania. So we can say, oh, the will of the people has been observed. So suddenly a coup becomes the will of the people. Do you see the leisure domain? This is the slight-handedness of terminology. So coup becomes will of the people. Will of the people is what democracy is. When is a coup a democratic event? Do you see? So here's where you're seeing the manipulation of words. And people, unfortunately, because they're not trained in this type of stuff, they get caught up in these things. Not everybody, but a lot of people. They're not aware. And you'll find that a lot, ambiguity. So the terms can be ambiguous or unambiguous. And then they can be clear and unclear. Right? So you can have an ambiguous term. Like, you could have clear and unclear. So quasar, if I'm talking about physics, and I talk about a neutrino, that's an unambiguous term to a physicist. But it's not a clear term to somebody who's not a physicist. So if I'm talking in a debate or something like that, and it's a general audience, I can't use unclear terms. I have to use unambiguous and clear terms, right? In order for my communication to be most effective. It shouldn't be vague either. So a vague term is also, if I use a word like tall, tall is unambiguous. It's clear, but it's vague. Tall in relation to what? How tall? It's not a precise term. So you have vague terms and precise terms. And then you also have abstract terms and concrete terms. So when I speak about liberty, that's an abstract term. But when I speak about the Pentagon, that's a concrete term. I'm talking about a physical building that actually exists. I can use it in an abstract way. So concrete terms can be used abstractly, but generally, you know, the Pentagon of power, right? I can use it as an abstraction. So, and then you can use it literal or metaphorical. These are all problems when we communicate. There are verses in the Quran that people will argue that they're literal, and others will argue, no, they're metaphorical. But these are problems of language. And that's why rhetoric is a sister science to logic. They tend to go together. They're very important, both of them. And then grammar also. You also have collective terms and divisive terms. Like you have a term like an army. You can't say John is an army unless you're using that metaphorically. That's metaphorical. But when I talk about army, that's a collective term. It's not a divisive term. But whereas when I talk about a soldier's in an army, but it's not a collective term. All right? So these are all ways that we use terms. They're used in many, many different ways in language. And so understanding these things, the reason these things are so important with revelation, you don't need to know this stuff to communicate, to go down into the souk and say, listen, I need 3 tomatoes. You're using quantity. And if you want ripe tomatoes, you're using quality. So when you talk to the guy, you're talking in using categories. You don't have to know those categories to communicate with them, right? You don't have to know when we use terms. You don't have to know that you're being clear or unclear, or ambiguous or vague, whether you're using a concrete or abstract noun, all these things. But when you get into revelation, you're dealing with a very dangerous subject. Because if you don't understand what the revelation is saying, it can be misused. And this is why our scholars exhausted these language studies to protect people from abusing the words used in Revelation that are sometimes ambiguous. Sometimes they're ambiguous. Sometimes the ulama differed on what they meant, because also you have univocal, equivocal. You have terms that can mean only one thing, and then terms that are equivocal. Or analogical terms. So you can use them analogically. So for instance, qur in the Quran is an equivocal term. It could mean the time between periods or the time of the period. Abu Hanifa said it meant the time. Hanafis. It means the time of the period. The Malikis and the Shafi'is said it means the time between the periods. That'll differ on the iddah. But there's no answer to that. And then words are used ambiguously. For instance, Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu, when the Prophet ﷺ, he woke up one morning and he said to Aisha, and it's at duha time, right? He took a nap after Fajr, and he woke up. And then he said, is there any food in the house? And she said, no. And he said, Inni sa'im, I'm fasting. Abu Hanifa said, that means that you can decide to fast after the sun, after Fajr, after dawn. Imam Shafi'i, Imam Malik said no. Imam Malik said no, because there's a hadith that says, La siyama liman lam yubayyit an-niyya. There's no fasting for the one that didn't go to sleep before dawn with that intention to fast. Abu Hanifa knew that hadith. He said, that's for fard. This is for nafila. So that was his position, because the language is not. Imam Malik said, you're interpreting that to be you're interpreting a dalala lughawiyya for a dalala shar'iyya. When the Prophet said, Inni sa'im, he was just saying, mumsikun ala ta'am. I guess we're not eating. He wasn't saying, I'm fasting. He was saying, I'm not eating. Because in Arabic, sa'im means the one who's not eating. So he was saying his dalala there was not shar'iyya, it was lughawiyya, wada'iyya. And this is why you have difference of opinion amongst the ulama, because this is how they're analyzing. They're going into the depths of meaning. And if you don't have these tools to do it, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. The Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith, Man atba' Ramadan sittan min Shawwal, فَكَأَنَّمَا صَامَ الدَّهْرُ كُلُّهُ. Whoever follows up Ramadan with 6 days from Shawwal, min Shawwal, it's as if he's fasted all year. Right? Because 30 days for Ramadan, 10 times 30, 300, and then 6, 10 times 6, 60, 360. It's like you fasted the whole year. Imam Shafi'i said that min is a partitive. It's called min tabaid. So it means the min, akeltu min al-khubz. I ate from the bread. So I'm talking about the whole, I took a part of it. Imam Malik said, no, that min is min al-ibtida. It's the min of initiation. Ataytu min Makkata. I came from Mecca. There's also min al-bayan, wa nunazzilu min al-Qur'an. It doesn't mean part of the Quran. يُبَيِّنُ أَنَّهُ al-Qur'an. So it's bayan. That's min al-bayan. There's different types of min. And language by its very nature is ambiguous. Most language is not precise. That's why the modern world loves mathematics, because they don't like to deal with ambiguities. They don't like to deal with the impreciseness. It's an age of quantity. It's not an age of quality. Quality is more subtle. Quantity, it's not subtle. So, okay. So let me go into the 5, and then we'll open up the question. Let's go into the 5. So, إما مقول في جواب ما هو بحسب الشركة المحضة كالحيوان بنسبة إلى الإنسان والفرس وهو الجنس. So that's called jins, the genus. ويرسم أنه كلي مقول على كثيرين مختلفين بالحقائق في جواب ما هو. So, what is said in response to the question, what is it, based solely on the shared members, such as animal in relation to human or horse, this is termed the genus. That's called jins. It can be described as a universal that is set in response to what is it, yet refers to many members that differ in their essential realities. All right? So, when we talk about genus, we're talking about a term that many things share that term. There's something they all share in common, but they're actually different. That's the genus. These are called the predicables. And these are also very important because when we get into definitions, you have to understand these. And then he says, وَإِمَّا مَقُولٌ فِي جَوَابِ مَا هُوَ بِحَسَبِ الشَّرِكَةِ وَالْخُصُوصِيَّةِ مَعًا كَالْإِنسَانِ بِنِسْبَةِ إِلَى زَيْدٍ وَعَمْرٍ وَهُوَ النوع ويرسم بأنه كلي مقول على كثيرين مختلفين بالعدد دون الحقيقة في جواب ما هو. And then the second is called the species, or what is said in response to what is it, based on both shared members as well as the specificity, so the khasa, such as human in relation to Zayd and Amr. This is termed the species, nu'. So you have the jins and the nu'. You have the genus and the species. This is logic, not biology, so don't get them confused. All right? So you have the genus and the species. It can be described as a universal that is said to respond in response to what is it, and that refers to many members that differ in number, not in their essential reality. So they differ in number, but they share the fasl. This is the third one. So, وإما غير مقول في جواب ما هو بل مقول في جواب أي شيء هو في ذاته وهو الذي يميز شيئا عما يشاركه في الجنس كالناطق بالنسبة إلى الإنسان وهو الفصل ويرسم بأنه كلي يقال على الشيء في جواب أي شيء هو في ذاته. So the jins, you just say what is it? It's an animal. So a lot of things share that quality. But then you say, what type of an animal is a human? Now you've got the species. But what makes the human different from other animals? That's called the fasl. So that's the difference. So a lot of things share that quality. But then you say, what type of an animal is a human? Now you've got the species. But what makes the human different from other animals? That's called the fasl. So that's the difference. It's called differentia or difference. The fasl is what yafsiruhu an ghayrihi min jinsihi. So it differentiates it from others in the same genus. So when we talk about the human, what makes us different from all the other animals? We have the ability to abstract. And as far as we know, no other animals are doing that. And that's our rationality. Because by abstraction we understand. By understanding we can judge. By judging we can argue and reason. And this is what makes us unique as a species. So this is what defines us. So you have the genus, the species, the difference, and then the last two, وَأَمَّا الْعَرَضِي, and as for the accidentals, فإما أن يمتنع انفكاكه عن الماهية وهو العرض اللازم أو لا يمتنع وهو العرض المفارق. So you have an inseparable accident. So as for the accidental universal, the aradi, it is either that which cannot be separated from its essential reality, namely the inseparable accident, arad lazim, or that which can be separated, namely the separable accident, which is aradun mufariq. So you have a separable and inseparable. When you look at, you can have a triangle, the inseparable, what's called the khasa, is that the sum of its angles equal 180. That's not the fasl. It's not what differentiates it from other polygons. Essentially, what essentially differentiates it is triangularity. But that the khasa is something that flows from the essence. It's inseparable from the essence, but it's not the essential thing that makes it different from other things. The fasl. All right. Anyway, so we'll stop there, and if anybody has any questions. So we'll start with definition tomorrow, inshallah, this is important. So those of you who know, who talk with others about this, if you need some explanations, I know it's abstract. It takes a little time to get, but it's not that difficult. All right, but if you're having a hard time, it's very natural. So don't worry about that. All right. And it takes, like I said, the story I told, the teacher had to teach it 3 times. I mean, generally you have to go over it before it really starts sinking in, because it's something you're doing intuitively, and this is learning what you're doing. But you are doing this. You're practicing logic all the time. These are just ways of understanding what you do naturally. Did the jinn have the same responsibilities of abstraction as humans? Capabilities of abstraction. Well, again, there are certain people that appear, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls them asum al-bukmu, the deaf and dumb. And he says that they're not using their intellects. So it appears that some people are really not, they seem to be almost incapable of doing it at a level that's going to take them to the truth. But the jinn, as far as we know, have free will because of who their progenitor is. They tend to be more in rebellion than not. Humans tend to, feel remorse, thank God. I mean, most people don't like to do evil. They feel bad about it. There are shayateen al-ins, but most humans, because our father felt remorse, even though his them was nisyan, according to our scholars. It was forgetfulness. But nonetheless, he felt nadama and asked forgiveness. So humans tend to have that capacity to a greater extent than the jinn. But there are good jinn. There are believing jinn. And they have free will to believe. So the disobedience of Iblis is not the kufr of ilhad. He believes in God, but his disobedience is ma'asiyah. It's like blatant, gross disobedience. And that's not like, trust me, if, you know, most people, unless you're Hunter S. Thompson or something, most people, if they see a policeman, they slow down. Right? Because they're in the presence of authority and they don't want to get in trouble. Iblis just threw that one off, you know. So that's, trust me, a cop will get really angry at you if you don't slow down. Because you're just basically dismissing his authority, right? So you notice, like, you're driving down the road and suddenly all the red lights on the back of the people's cars, you know there's a cop ahead. Because everybody slows down at the same time. So I know somebody who just kept zooming past. The cop pulled him over. He said, "Why didn't you slow down like everybody else?" He said, "I felt like such a hypocrite." So he let him off. Probably never heard that one before. It was a Muslim too, you know. What's the difference between inseparable accident and differentia? Well, like I said, the difference is the fasl. It's what makes it unique in its essential difference from other things in its genus. So with a human being, an inseparable accident would be the potential to laugh. That's an inseparable accident to the human being. But it's not a fasl. It doesn't make the human uniquely human. As far as we know, other animals aren't laughing. I mean, we don't think, you know, the cows are sitting around chewing the cud and telling jokes, unless you're Larson, right, the guy that writes The Far Side. Yeah, so you use triangularity in your example, but I thought triangularity was 180-degree angles and 3 sides. Well, that is, but you don't have to know that the sum of those angles is 180 degrees to understand a triangle. You know, there are lots of people that know what a triangle is, and they don't know that it equals 180 degrees, whether it's a scalene or a isosceles. Right? Or equilateral. They don't know that unless you study geometry or something. So to get the essence of a triangle, you don't need to know that. But it is a khasa. It's something that is part of the essence of a triangle, but it's not indicative of the essence. And in that way, it's inseparable from a triangle. Whereas whether it's a big triangle, a little triangle, a red triangle, those are all separable accidents.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
I'm not sure if this is an illogical question, so feel free to just tell me if it is.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, you mentioned consensus. How Islamically do we define a consensus?
Ijma'.
And, sorry.
Like in usul?
I mean, in terms of, like, do we have a majority and by what scale? And do we differentiate what we mean by consensus in terms of terms and universals? Is there like a difference?
Yeah. Ijma' it's a term. It's linguistically pretty unambiguous because it means to agree upon something. Consensus. But there's different types of ijma'at. You have ijma' al-sahaba. So this is the division of the term. We didn't get into that, but terms have divisions, just like you have divisions of glass. You have different types of glass. So there are different types of ijma'. You have, in Imam Malik's madhab, you have the ijma' of Ahl al-Madinah, which Imam Shafi'i, Imam Abu Hanifa, and Imam Ahmad, that's not a consideration with them, except for a few things. So, but when we talk about the ijma', it's what the ummah has agreed upon, the ulama, the mujtahidun of the ummah have agreed upon in any given time. Some of the ulama argue that it's not possible to have ijma'. And then you have what's called ijma' as-sukuti, which is the silent consensus, so nobody spoke up in opposition. But then they argue that not everybody knew about it because they didn't have the type of communication that we have today. So generally, a better term is the jamhur. The jamhur is when the four imams agree on something. So that's a stronger. Jamhur just means the majority. So like the four imams agreed that saying talaq 3 times, the four madhabs all agree that it's mulzim. You know, if you say it at once and you intended 3 separate ones, it's talaq bid'i. It's not a sunni talaq, but it's binding on. Now some of the scholars today say it's not ijma', and they've given fatwas from other, like Ibn Taymiyyah didn't agree with that. So some of the modern scholars have broken with the consensus of the 4 madhabs. You know, these are debates, modern debates in Islamic law. Is that clear?
Assalamu alaikum. At the beginning, you talked about essence.
Yeah.
I think Aristotle defined essence as what it is to be.
Yeah.
So does that mean things can lose essence? And
No.
what does it mean Islamically, like essence? What's the terminology?
Yeah. I mean, that of a thing, dhatu shay, is what it is. Mahiyatuhu, mahiya, what it is. And the law of identity, a thing is what it is. The law of contradiction is it either is or it isn't. And that's the tasdeeq, the judgment. So you ask what, that is understanding. You ask whether, that's whether it is or it isn't. So it's either affirmation or negation, sadab or mujib. And then why is the reasoning behind, like, why it is. So for instance, does the world exist or doesn't? What is the world? Okay, so we can all agree that the world is the universe. Are there other universes? We don't know. Multiverse theory is a popular theory now because there's kind of this idea that it'll help explain why this universe exists. Because if this is all there is, then they have a lot of problems in cosmology. Like, where did it come from? How did it get here? So if we agree the world is, you know, the universe, so what is it? Well, it's all the things. We have its comprehension and its extension. Right? So it's comprehension, the universe, you have to understand what that term means. Its extension, it extends to all those things that are palpable and exist in this known world. Right? And then you have whether it is or it isn't. Now, there are some people that argue that this is an illusion. It's Maya. You just think it exists. It's all in your head. And your head doesn't even exist. Right? There's people that will argue that. Descartes, you know, he started radical skepticism, and then he just came to the conclusion, well, the only thing I know that is that I'm thinking. And I must be here to be thinking. So my thinking gives me the reality of my existence. The Muslims would call that madness. Because they would argue that, you know, this is real. it has a realness to it. It's a type of reality. But it's one level. It's a martaba of wujud. It's one type of wujud. And then why? That's the big question. And that's the question science deals mostly with mahiyya, right? It deals with the first question and the second question. It doesn't deal with the third question because it doesn't really answer why. It can answer how. It can make arguments about how. But to ask why is there something rather than nothing? That's a big question. Why is there something rather than nothing? Where did it come from? Why is it here? Why are we here? What should we be doing while we're here? These are difficult questions. But for those who accept prophets, the prophets have access to a level